We're back for another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. I'd like to welcome to the pod the Executive VP of GMP Radio Reps, Greg Tacher. How you doing, sir?
Doing well, thanks, Andy, for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Want to talk to you about a lot of stuff on the sales side, but before we get into all that, can you tell them your radio origin story?
Yeah, let's go back to the early beginnings. So in camp, when I was 8 years old, in Graham, Washington, right outside of Puyallup, with a view of Mount Rainier, there was a small building in the middle of the campground that had a big speaker that broadcast out to the entire campground, and they had an hour-long slot you could sign up for, and they called it a radio station. And I found myself in there with a mic playing "Drift Away" by Dobie Gray on a 45 over and over again.
Great tune, great tune.
And I was kind of hooked. But from there, at San Diego State University in telecommunications and film school, I found myself on KCR, K Campus Radio, which had a booming 1-watt signal into the dorms. And I did a morning show with a guy named Tony Finn, and fell in love with it there. And I did everything from spin music to read news, and was completely captivated by radio.
Well, that's interesting because I asked this question of everybody, and it seems like so many people are bit by the bug at a very early age. But you're the
Fair
first
enough, yeah.
you're the first at camp at 8 years old. So
That one surprised me, yeah.
when did
And my dad had been in radio for almost his entire career, and he was never on air, but he managed some local radio stations in Seattle back when AM was the place to hear the Beatles,
yeah.
And then he started the rep firm, the Tacher Company, named after our name, and I ended up buying that from him with my partner Joe Costello many years ago, and we expanded it from a Northwest group with offices in just Seattle and Portland to more of a national group. And then about 6 years ago, we sold to and merged with Gen Media Partners, and it's been a great partnership from there.
That's interesting. Similar, my dad started in radio when he was 18, all on started on the programming side and then in the management and all that. As soon as you want that steady income, that's when you try to
That's right.
get out from behind the mic and get into management. But how has radio sales changed since you started your career?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great question. There's a lot of change, and there's some similarities, I think, still. But I think looking back from where we stand in time right now, one of the ways that it's really changed is just speed.
Mm-hmm.
People have seemingly shrunk the amount of the time they have for each other to even look at how to put a good campaign together, how to get great results in radio. And some of that time that you would expect to spend with a client, really digging into their business, putting together a radio buy, evaluating the buy, oftentimes that's been so shrunk that I think radio gets evaluated much more judgmentally. It's much more difficult because of the speed with which everything's moving. And that makes it particularly difficult, I think, on salespeople. I think some of the ways it remains the same is I think radio salespeople tend to be some of the best marketing partners and relationship partners with businesses because they still need to tell a story. There's not the deliverables like there is in digital media, some of these others, where you can go back and say you got X amount of impressions, this many clicks. The proof's in the pudding. And with radio, that takes time, of course, reach and frequency. So some of those things still remain the same in sales, where hand-holding the client and becoming their marketing go-to person still remains the same, as I think is a really high and elevated calling.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the speed, and I like that take because one of the things I've talked about a lot with people on this podcast, anytime we get in the sales area, is how it seems like people want a quicker turnaround than the model that we're used to, the needs assessment, multiple meetings, going back and which was all for a good reason to come up with a customized solution for them. But a lot of advertisers are wanting a quicker turnaround on that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think especially in the national sales realm, which is where I spend most of my life now, um, that's been a really interesting thing to watch because it seems that radio has gotten commoditized in that space quite a bit through cost per point, cost per thousand,
Hmm.
and what seemed to be a sales technique that a lot of agencies employed years and years ago, which was give them a deadline for the RFP. So it doesn't allow for that back and forth. Now you're just talking what are your deliverables according to what Nielsen says or doesn't say, or according to the cost per spot I have for your market. Um, because that shrunk so much in the national world, um, it doesn't allow for a lot of the other things you would expect in sales, which is what's the value of your audience? What are we trying to accomplish with this campaign? Some of those things are lost. And even after the fact, a campaign runs, many national advertisers aren't really even that interested in finding out how did it go. They just go back to the client with a new plan. So
Yeah.
that's really been affected in our world for sure.
What What's one thing radio as an industry can do to get a larger share of national ad dollars?
You know, this is a continuing conversation that shows up at um, NAB meetings, state convention meetings, uh, and even in the trades. And that's a tricky question. I think there's different lenses with which you could look at this through that could be helpful. One is who is radio nationally and how are they communicating to the people who control the national dollars?
Hmm.
And when those national dollars are planned and they split up the pie, and radio gets its 6%, as they say, and TV gets its percentage, cable gets its percentage, digital might be lumped in now for a big percentage, perhaps outdoor or other kinds of direct types of marketing. That conversation doesn't seem to get invaded much by the industry as a whole. It might happen with the national rep firm like CATS or with us, where we're trying to lean into not just buyers, but the planning community as well as a client. Um, but oftentimes that is done outside of us. So it does seem that as an industry, we could use more advocacy from
Hmm.
that point. I'm not sure who will take up that banner. That's been a tough one. And part of that challenge is simply the conversations, again, that are happening with the national rep firms a lot of times. And the agencies are more about pricing and fulfilling their buy. So that's a challenging one. I mean, I would love to see more work done in collaboration with groups like um, the radio RAB, NAB, those kinds of things. And I think they do advocate well, but it seems like there could be further partnership and development in that kind of work.
Yeah, and I go back to a Radio Gets Results campaign that somebody did years ago, where I feel like there's something, like you said, if we could advocate a little better, whether that's through the NAB or the RAB, something to counter the narrative that radio's on such a decline, which is not true, and tell some of this, tell our story and how and the reach that radio still has a little more effectively. I think that would help, don't you?
I think so too. And yeah, I think that would continue to help everybody. I think another lens to look at it through, which can be really helpful too, where radio can grow the national piece, but it may not happen on a global level, is the local stations working with whoever is interfacing for their national business, whether it's a rep or if they're talking to an agency directly, making the local connection and and making sure that if you are perhaps a franchisee that's sending money into a pool that gets decided on a national level, that you help empower that local franchisee to elevate their voice in the conversation and say, hey, in our market, we know you're doing X, Y, and Z, but we'd really like to make sure our radio partner is included because that's part of our overall mix. And that can be disruptive to the agency. However, it tends to be the best thing for the client at the end of the day. And so that kind of work still, I think, is really important. It's a longer sales cycle. They can be difficult to get to the right people you need to talk to. Sometimes the franchisees don't feel empowered to bring that up, and they're can be nervous about pushing that button. But I think it's really important that those things still get pressed in on so dollars flow appropriately. Because radio, although it doesn't have metrics to serve back like digital does, it moves people in a way that not many other media can.
Do you think that I every convention I go to, especially the big ones like NAB, I'm talking to somebody who's trying to come up with some other kind of way to do audience estimates. Do you think we're on the cusp of some kind of breakthrough when it comes to that?
That's a great question. I've thought about that a lot. It does seem like, especially with radio being delivered with a stream or through a phone, there are other ways to capture who's actually listening. I don't think it's a secret that Nielsen's statistical data doesn't really pass the mustard in terms of sample size and that kind of thing. I mean, in statistics classes in high school, we were taught what sample sizes would need to be, and they're struggling with that. So I do think there's a need for that. I think that could change the narrative quite a bit in seeing the audiences that radio actually does deliver. And I know some other companies that do some ratings data gathering, like Eastland, which has appropriate sample sizes and is really useful statistical data. The agencies haven't fully adopted that. Some are using it, but some aren't. And the currency of this whole game is where the dollars get spent. So somehow bridging that has been, I think, one of the most challenging things. So even if there was a breakthrough in some sort of new way of discovering who's listening, and that was easily digestible and could get down to the station level, the impact of that dollar-wise could be challenging unless that gap is bridged on the national level for where some of these big dollars are planned.
Right, because you got to get the buy-in from the people spending the money for it to even matter.
And that's an expensive proposition. So I respect the fact that it's difficult. But I do think that there's probably something coming that'll be more useful.
Yeah, I know I've heard a lot about the audio fingerprint technology, and it seems to me like there's got to be something to go through a phone that can accurately track it. That's if not happening this year, it's not far away.
And that's happening on a micro level. We have a lot of clients that have really robust apps, and they're collecting all kinds of data. I mean, people are opting in as they listen online or interact with the station for promotions or events that are coming up in the local community, or news gathering, where you have my app and you're at a news event and you can stream it live back to me. I can then see if that's something we want to air. And we have a client that actually aggregates that information back. And so they have all kinds of data to report with that. But it's a much more pure connection.
Well, and to me, that's the winning combination. You use what we've got. Nielsen and Eastland are the systems that we have right now, and combine that with, using digital to get as much information on a percentage of your audience as you can. If you have 100,000 QM and you can get information from 10,000 of them through the digital means, that's a pretty powerful sales tool.
Sure is, and that would be a much larger sample size than any of the ratings we're talking about, right? And you have it right within you. Yeah.
Yep. One of the big things I always get asked from clients is, where can I find salespeople? How can I keep salespeople? What can radio groups do to better attract and retain top sales talent?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's one that needs to be paid attention to. I think some of the things I would be doing if I was running a local station is I would be immersed with my local community college, or college or high school group, and I would be learning the language that makes radio relevant to them, which probably is much more descriptive than just radio, because for a lot of these young kids, they don't have a radio. That's a noun, but it would be marketing expert or whatever you would find. And I would bring them bring them on in internships, summer jobs, and I would train them up and help them find success within the media. And I think some of those people could be the best advocates for the next generation. And I've seen this in a couple of instances where I had a client who had an ag network, and they put it together themselves. And they found some of their salespeople from the local community college, and they looked like young people today, which was great. Maybe not like me, who looks like a lot of the radio people of old, and old, balding, working on my diet, that kind of thing. But these were vibrant people who had tattoos and nose rings and were just killing it and completely immersed. And so I think bringing people on, opening it up, and they didn't refer to it as radio. It was audio, plus they had digital they were working on. So they really saw it as a marketing partner, and they were really enthused about it. So it's a lot of work, but I think that's one place I would be going for sure.
Are there certain kinds of sales jobs that translate a little better to training them to do radio sales?
That's a great question. I think sales jobs that would be a little less linear in selling one thing and a little more holistic and actually really evaluating the client, evaluating their needs, making good choices from a marketing partner standpoint. And so I've seen some people come out of real estate and do exceptionally well because they're good at client development and they're patient. But I'm not sure. Even as I go around and visit small markets and medium markets, it seems like the radio stations are trying to tap other industries, and I'm not sure that I've seen one or a few that actually deliver better. Unless it's TV or something like that, and they have some of that language.
I just know when I started, it seemed like everyone was looking for someone that at least had some kind of media experience. And now they're open to, well, there might be some other sales jobs that translate pretty well to radio. Real estate's a good one because that's all relationship driven.
That's right. Yeah.
To me, I've always, and this is a guy that I obviously don't have the sales experience that you do, but to me, it's always seemed like radio sellers fall into either the closers camp or the relationship seller camp.
Yeah.
Would you rather have, if you had a team full of one or the other, would you rather have a team full of closers or relationship sellers?
Well, speaking personally, relationship sellers all day long. And I think,
agreed. Yeah.
I think a good relationship partner, if you are bringing them a great solution, and I think radio is a great solution still for marketing. And there may be other things you offer too. You maybe have something under the digital banner, which could be your own website, or offering what everybody else offers, right? A lot of radio stations are getting into that. But if you're my client, I want to build a relationship with you to best meet your needs. And if it goes well for you, it'll close itself and do really well. And sometimes when I think of a closer, I just think of somebody who's trying to get the sale and then move on to the next thing. And radio takes time. It might be one of the most challenging things today because everything moves so quickly. But you build an audience, even for your product over time, with your messaging, with your events, and that's what you share with your partners. And so if people can see that and benefit from that, it can go really well. And I think I'm still seeing that quite a bit in some of these more niche formats, whether it's Hispanic or urban or ag is another one, where that kind of relationship selling still works at some level, which is really nice.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, closers seem great at first, and there's nothing wrong with having one or two on the team, but the churn is just so much higher. They're going to, the good thing about relationship sellers is once they get somebody on the air, they tend to keep them on the air.
Exactly. And we've heard the whole thing. It's like, I tried radio, it didn't work. And that to me sounds like somebody closed you on radio, right? That you didn't really build a relationship with it to where it could really shine. So that's important, yeah.
Does cold calling still work?
That's great. Oh, you bet. Of course. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, again, if cold calling for closing is brutal,
Yeah.
Like if you're a closer and you're just dialing for dollars, I've had plenty of jobs like that in the past. Telemarketing, you name it. But I think identifying a company or service company that can benefit from what you're bringing to them, your audience, is always worth a conversation. And the cold call, it really is, could we sit down and have a cup of coffee, talk about it when you're ready? There's all these things that I bring and that I know about, and I think it could be a benefit, but let me learn more about your business and see if it's really a fit. And so that's always going to be worthwhile. And it doesn't need to be yes, no. It could be not now. How about later? Or sure, come on in. Or you bet. Or even letting them know I'm not really trying to sell anything. I'm really trying to get to know your business better and see if there might be something here for you. And I think that's always beneficial.
So it's really more of a research, then make the cold call.
I think so. Yeah. Which I think is a good way to approach sales. Know who you're talking to a little bit. Yeah.
I just know the groups I've worked at, when they would do those cold calling weeks, it was just brutal. I mean, everyone hated it, and it never seemed to yield the kind of results that they were hoping for.
Well, and you say that, Eddie, it's interesting because, I work with, we literally work with thousands of radio stations, and I travel quite a bit. We really like to go to the markets and sit in the stations and get a feel and meet everybody from engineering to sales to management to you name it, traffic, and anything else that's going on there. And I would say there's a really wide variety of strategies around this. Some have gotten quite sophisticated and are using new technology to learn a lot about their clients and target what might be a cold call really well. And they're having good benefits from that. Some still are using sort of the yellow page mentality, although it's not handing you the book, but it's really look online and who's advertising where and just try and pound them down. And so some people are hanging on to that strategy, and I think it's discouraging because it's certainly not as helpful anymore for drumming up sales. And you might hit one in a while, but that can be really challenging. But I still see some using that mentality.
Well, and on the programming consulting side, my preference is to go to the markets before I ever start throwing out suggestions, because I love, you have to meet the players. And I like to get a feel for their building, their operation, the whole 9 yards before and know a little bit more about the market than I can find out just researching online, as opposed to just immediately come in and start nitpicking this, that, and the other.
I so appreciate that because I think the market is so crucial, and that's why we go. Every market has its own makeup. It has its own things. It might have like junior colleges, or it might have certain festivals. It might have certain geography that lends itself to something that stations could be doing, history, all that kind of thing. And so I think that's really, really important.
Well,
And that's an important part of the sales process. Yeah.
Yeah, on my side, it also helps with the pushback. You're going to get the pushback of, what does this guy sitting in Dallas Fort Worth know about XYZ market? And it helps a little bit. It helps head that off if you do learn a little bit more about their market before you come in and you start, making a whole bunch of suggestions.
Yeah.
How do you think, I mean, it's already impacting it some, but how will AI impact radio sales?
Oh, that's great. I've seen some AI tools that write wonderful commercials, and I think that could be helpful in the sales process. But likely, one way I think it can really help is in information gathering about clients and getting to know their industry before you even walk in the door. And I've seen some software that you can put in a client and it will go out and gather, for instance, all the available marketing strategies they're using, especially digitally. What's their presence on Facebook, if they have it, TikTok, Instagram, but also have there been any ads placed in the market, like through media monitors or something like that? And so bringing all that to one place, you can get a real good snapshot before you even go see a client of what some of their strategies have been. And I think that could be tremendously helpful in the sales process because it'll speed up the process for the salesperson, which right now can seem a little slow sometimes. So I anticipate that. I haven't really thought about that though beyond that. I mean, I think one of the things that every salesperson is looking at, is that going to replace me? So I think there are tools right now where and programs where people can be cut out of the process. Um, and I'm not sure it's probably going to be adopted by some, but but especially in the national world, there's so much to navigate still. I think that's a bit of a ways off before that.
But I like your answer because in truth, the best way to defend yourself from being replaced is to kind of embrace it and use it as if you're on the sales side, use it as an AI sales assistant to help you be more productive, and you're much less likely to get replaced by it then because it's then enhancing your productivity and making you better at it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, AI essentially is an aggregator of all the information that's available to whatever AI bot you have. And so it can make you smarter that way. And it can offer suggestions too that you might not think of in terms of strategies for a client. So that could be helpful too. Yeah.
I know you've spoken a lot about leadership, and how would you define your management style?
Oh, wow. Great question. What's my management style? Maybe relationship
Hmm.
is right. I mean, I try and be people first. Um, I think I try and identify strengths in people and encourage those to grow and blossom. And if people have weaknesses, like we all do in certain areas, try and support those so they don't get tripped up by them. Um, and in a broader context of growth, because I'm still super ambitious for the industry, for our clients, and finding ways to make the most of opportunities. Um, but there needs to be a partnership and teamwork in these endeavors because a lot of them are going to be new. Just doing things the way we used to do them, if we're hanging on to those, we'll time out for sure, and we'll probably lose our enthusiasm because it's never going to be like it was. And many of us remember golden days where buys would just come in and things were tremendous and you didn't have to do that much. And if we're sitting back in that mindset, we're going to suffer. And so will our clients.
Yeah, to me though, it's kind of like sometimes when we look back on things from the past, we tend to remember the good things. Looking back to those days, it seems like those were the golden days of radio, but there were a lot of challenges that we faced back then that we don't face today. You know,
Without question. Yeah. I mean, when was the last time you had to go pick up a tape and make
yeah.
sure it got to the client on time, right? And then it was a bad dub. I mean, yeah, these kinds of things. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I agree. That's a great way to look at it.
Well, in I know I got into management early because I grew up in the business, so it kind of helped me move into management early. But one of the mistakes I made very early on was I had a vision for what an on-air talent looked and sounded like. I had a vision for what a salesperson was, and you quickly learn that that's the wrong way to look at it, and you've got to manage to specific personality types differently. There's not a one size fits all, and it took me a while to learn that.
Yeah, I think I was the same way where I was very judgmental about how things should be or how somebody should show up. And for instance, I just got back from the Montana Broadcasters Convention, and some of these stations that are really doing well in these medium and small markets, I mean, doing really well, are an amalgam of all kinds of personalities, and they tend to gel as a group and support each other in all the wackiness or quirkiness. And and they're there to serve the community. They still understand they have a voice that actually impacts the community, and they're showing up for that in a really good way. And yet, you sit down around a table with them, and it's people from all kinds of walks of life, different kinds of backgrounds, and it just seems to work together really, really well.
Well, I know with a very limited staff, I was tasked with starting a small market station when I was probably 25 ish. And one of the sales reps knew everybody in town. He was a good old country boy, knew everybody in town, but he couldn't write a spot to save his life. He would literally sell a spot and hand you a business card and say, "There, that's what I got. Turn that into a 60-second spot." So he frustrated the heck out of our sales manager, but he closed. I mean, I'm like, we'll find him somebody to help him write spots. He sells like no one I've ever met in my life, and you
It's
just have to be
perfect.
open to that, and working through those, work with their strengths and help them on their weaknesses.
Big time. And the relationship, you can never. I don't think you never overvalue the relationships people have with people, especially in this area, because essentially you're asking for their trust in your medium.
Yeah, and on the local side, you have such a. I mean, you can't break that trust and last, because the word gets around too quickly.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important trait for a business leader in 2024?
I think business leaders need to. I don't know about the most important, but one of the things that shows up for me that seems vital is a curiosity around learning new technologies, new ways of doing things, and keeping that fresh and alive. Because not only are things changing, they continue to change. Nothing's landed yet with AI, for instance, or even our electronic data interchange we're doing all the time. These things are in flux and growing. Budgets are moving around. Clients are still trying to figure out best places to put money, and they're probably less certain now than they've been in a long time. And so I think that culture of learning is super, super key. And getting feedback on areas that as leaders we need growth in and aren't just avoiding. And so we have to, it sounds kitschy, but I think we still need to continue to reinvent ourselves and be flexible. And that's challenging for leaders, because leaders love to have a plan, have a system, put it in place, and just run it, and then deal with all the fringe stuff that comes up. But I'm not sure that that's going to get it all done the way we want it to get it done. So I think we've got to read, learn, take classes, give ourselves some training, those kinds of things, so we can stay relevant and really to excel still and not just get by.
Yeah, I think that's key. I mean, because it all trickles down, and so you're setting the tone, and if you're stagnant, then your corporation is going to be stagnant. Your employees are going to be stagnant. But if you're curious, you're learning, you're always throwing out, hey, I read this great book about free to focus. This writer wrote about time management. That those kind of things, I think, go a long way.
Yeah, and I'm seeing it at state conventions too, where a lot of speakers are coming in and giving this kind of training, and it completely refreshes the group. You can tell. There's just so much to deal with for everybody right now. To be able to have these times where you can clear out things and get refocused again is super beneficial.
Yep. Well, how can they get a hold of you?
Hey, you can get a hold of me email, phone. I'm greg.tacher@genmediapartners.com. If you go to the website, there's a link there. You can grab me. But thanks for having me on, Andy.
Yeah. And anything else you want to add about ways that you can help groups and anybody listening that's a sales manager or GM?
Yeah, I do think we are showing up in a good space of flexibility and growth. We are innovating, and it may not be on a massive macro level where it affects everybody, but we're finding ways to innovate around our clients, our radio station clients, to find opportunities that are still there that can be maximized. And so we're doing that kind of work, and it's expensive on our part, requires more people and research, but we're bullish on that still being something that can pay off for our clients. So we're spending a lot of time in those areas still. And we'd love to have conversations with people who are curious about that.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on and having a conversation with us.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Radio Influencers is a radio update production. New episodes are released on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.